Elizabeth Carter pressed her hand flat against the cold window glass and did not cry. She had run out of tears 3 months ago, the night she found Caroline's ribbon tucked inside her husband's coat pocket, still smelling of another woman's perfume. She was 7 months pregnant, standing alone in a house full of everything money could buy, and she made a decision right then that would change everything. She would stop waiting for William Carter to see her, and she would make the world see her instead. If this story moves something in your heart, please subscribe to this channel and follow Elizabeth's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Boston, Massachusetts. Summer, 1817. The Harbor House restaurant on Federal Street was the kind of place where Boston's finest came to be seen. Every table carried the weight of reputation. Every glass of wine poured meant something. Every guest who walked through that carved oak door was either building their name or spending it. William Carter had been coming here for 6 years. He knew the maitre d' by first name. He knew which corner table caught the best evening light. He knew exactly how to order the roasted duck without it arriving overdone. Tonight, he sat at table 7, the one tucked behind the velvet curtain near the far window, and he was not alone. Caroline Hayes sat across from him. She was 24 years old, with dark copper hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck, and eyes the color of a New England winter sky, pale and cold, and quietly certain of themselves. She wore a gown of deep burgundy silk that her father had likely paid a small fortune for, and she had the kind of smile that knew exactly what effect it had on the men who received it. She touched the rim of her wineglass with 2 fingers and tilted her head. "You've been distracted all evening," she said. Not an accusation, a careful observation, the kind that comes from a woman who has learned to read the man she is trying to keep. "I'm fine," William said. "You said that 20 minutes ago when the soup arrived. And I meant it then, too." Caroline leaned back slightly. She studied him with the practiced patience of someone who had learned that pressing too hard too early was the surest way to lose ground. William Carter was by any measure a remarkable man to look at. 32 years old with broad shoulders, built more from years of working the docks before he inherited his father's company than from any idle privilege. Dark hair kept short. A jaw that always seemed set against something. He wore his success the way some men wore old boots comfortably without thinking about it, without ever wondering if it still fit. He had built the Carter Maritime Company from a half-ruined fleet of 4 aging vessels into one of the most profitable shipping operations on the eastern seaboard. He had done it by being relentless, focused, entirely completely committed to the thing in front of him. The problem, as it turned out, was that the thing in front of him had stopped being his wife approximately 3 years ago. "Dear," Caroline reached across the table and touched his hand. Her fingers were warm, deliberate. "Stay with me tonight," she said softly. "You've been carrying something heavy all week. You don't have to go back." Go back. As if his home were a duty rather than a place. As if Elizabeth were an obligation rather than a woman. William looked down at Caroline's hand over his. He had a strange moment, brief, almost too quick to catch, where something inside him pulled sideways. Where the weight of what he was doing pressed against his ribs in a way he usually managed to ignore. He was about to speak when the front door of the Harbor House opened. A current of warm summer air moved through the room. He didn't look up at first, but something made him. Call it instinct. Call it guilt. Call it the particular silence that falls over a room when someone of consequence has just entered it. William turned his head toward the door, and the world for a brief, terrible moment stopped making any sense at all. She was wearing blue. A soft, pale blue silk gown with a high waist that did nothing to hide the fullness of 7 months of pregnancy, and she wore it the way a woman wears something she chose deliberately not to impress. Not to apologize, but simply because it was hers. Her brown hair was pinned low at the back of her neck with pearl clips he had never seen before. She was wearing his mother's pearl earrings. She was smiling. Not at William. She hadn't seen William yet. She was smiling at something Jonathan Sterling had just said to her as he held the restaurant door open and followed her inside, his hand hovering at the small of her back. In that particular way, a man holds himself near a woman he respects. Jonathan Sterling. William's brain processed the name like a cold wave. Jonathan Sterling was 58 years old, one of the wealthiest landowners in New England. A man whose signature on a contract could move the politics of 3 counties. And he was standing in the doorway of the harbor house, with his hand near Elizabeth Carter's back, and an expression on his face that William had seen the man use exactly twice before in his life. Once, when Sterling had looked at a stretch of coastline he wanted to acquire, and once when he had shaken hands on a deal that tripled his fortune. It was the expression of a man who recognized exceptional value, and he was looking at William's wife. William, Caroline's voice, somewhere distant. He didn't move. He watched Jonathan lean down and say something close to Elizabeth's ear, watched her tilt her head back slightly and laugh a real laugh, open and unguarded, the kind that reached her eyes first and then the rest of her face. William could not remember the last time he had made Elizabeth laugh like that. He could not, if he was honest with himself, remember the last time he had tried. The maitre d' was already moving toward them, toward Sterling and Elizabeth, with the particular deference reserved for guests who warranted it without asking. A corner table. The best one. The one nearest the window where the evening light came through golden and clean. Jonathan pulled out Elizabeth's chair. She thanked him with a small nod, sat carefully arranging herself with a grace that had nothing to do with performance. And then, only then, did she look up. Her eyes moved across the room the way they always had, calmly, steadily. The way Elizabeth had always looked at things as if she were taking inventory of what was real and what was show. Her gaze reached table 7, found William, held. Elizabeth Carter did not flinch. She did not look away. She did not look hurt or embarrassed or furious or broken. She looked at her husband of 4 years, sitting across from another woman, and her expression was something William had never prepared himself for and could not name. It was the look of a woman who had already finished grieving something. Then she turned back to Jonathan Sterling and said something that made him nod, and picked up her menu. William. Caroline's voice was sharp now. She had followed his gaze. She had understood in the way women who occupy a dangerous position always understand exactly what was happening. Don't. That's my wife, he said. I'm aware. He stopped. His voice had done something unexpected, something rough at the edges. She's 7 months along. I know how many months she is. He looked at Caroline. Something had shifted in her face, too, a tightening around the eyes. The smile was still there, but it had gone small and careful. She's here with Jonathan Sterling, William said. Caroline set down her wine glass. Sterling is a business contact. He's probably discussing... She's laughing, William said. His voice was flat, almost quiet. When is the last time you saw Elizabeth Carter laugh like that in public? Caroline had no answer for that. Because the truth was, Caroline Hayes had attended half a dozen of the same society functions as Elizabeth Carter over the past 2 years. And in every single one of them, Elizabeth had been composed, careful, gracious in the way that a woman learns to be gracious when she is performing the role of wife to a man who no longer notices her. She had never laughed like that, not publicly, not with that kind of ease. William stood up. Sit down, Caroline said quickly. I'm going to... William. Her voice was low and precise. If you walk over there right now in front of this entire room, you will make a scene that this city will be discussing for the next 6 months. Sit down. He sat down. But he did not stop watching. Across the room, Jonathan was speaking. Elizabeth was listening, not politely, not with the dutiful attention of a woman waiting for her turn to agree, but with her whole attention. Her chin was up. Her eyes were focused. Once or twice she leaned forward and said something, and Jonathan would nod, and then he would say something back, and she would nod in return, not deferring, engaging. William had watched Elizabeth sit through 100 business dinners. He had watched her smile and pour tea and say the right things at the right moments, and disappear so seamlessly into the background of his professional life that he had stopped noticing she was there. He had never watched her be the person the conversation was built around. He had never watched another man make notes on a paper at the table because he didn't want to forget what she was saying. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and turned back to his own plate. "You're not eating," Caroline observed. "I'm not hungry." "It's just a dinner meeting, William. Sterling has been developing coastal properties for 30 years. Elizabeth knows the financial side of your company. It makes sense that he'd want to—" "She suggested the harbor development," William said. Caroline stopped. "3 years ago," William said. His voice was steady, but something beneath it was not. "She came to me with a full proposal. 12 pages. Drafted herself. She had been studying the Massachusetts coastline for months, the shipping lanes, the tidal patterns, the land acquisition costs. She wanted to propose a partnership with Sterling's land holdings and our fleet routes. She said, if we moved on the northern harbor before Whitmore and Sons did, we could lock in the most profitable import routes on the eastern seaboard for the next 20 years. He paused. I told her that she didn't understand how these things worked. I told her to leave the business to me. Caroline said nothing. I dismissed the whole thing in about 4 minutes, William said, and then I went back to whatever I was doing. He looked across the room. Jonathan Sterling had the paper in front of him. Elizabeth was pointing at something. Sterling was nodding, slowly with the deliberateness of a man who takes ideas seriously. She went to Sterling herself, William said. Not a question. Didn't she? By the time the main course was served, William had stopped pretending to eat. He watched his wife conduct a business dinner with the most influential man in Massachusetts, with a steadiness and confidence that made something in his chest ache in a way he didn't fully understand, yet didn't have words for yet, but could feel plainly enough. Caroline had stopped trying to reclaim his attention. She had gone quiet in the way beautiful women go quiet when they understand that they are no longer the most interesting person in the room and that the room isn't even looking at them. Once Jonathan reached across the table and poured more water into Elizabeth's glass without being asked. A small thing, a quiet thing. The kind of small gesture that a man makes without thinking when he has been paying close enough attention to notice what a woman needs. It was such a simple thing. William could not remember the last time he had poured water for his wife. He could not remember the last time he had noticed her glass was empty. I should go, William said. We haven't finished dinner. I'll take care of the bill on the way out. William, I need to speak with my wife. Caroline looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her eyes. Not quite fear, not quite calculation. Something that sat between them. Then she folded her hands in her lap with a deliberateness that took William a moment to recognize. She was bracing herself. And what exactly, Caroline said quietly, do you intend to say to her? William didn't answer, because the honest answer was that he had no idea. Oh, he crossed the dining room. The room was full, but it felt very small. The sound of silver and low conversation, and the clink of crystal. He was aware acutely uncomfortably of people noticing. The discreet turn of a head, the slight pause in someone's sentence. Boston's society was not a collection of people who missed things. Jonathan Sterling saw him coming first. The older man's expression didn't change significantly, a slight settling of the eyes, the kind of adjustment that comes from decades of reading rooms and men in them. He set down his fork. He did not stand. Elizabeth looked up. Her face gave nothing. Not anger, not guilt, not the pleading look of a woman hoping to be forgiven for being somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. Nothing. That nothing was somehow worse than anything else she could have shown him. Elizabeth, William said. William. Her voice was completely even. He stopped at the edge of their table. He had not thought this through at all. He was standing here with absolutely no plan, which was not a condition he experienced often and did not know what to do with. I didn't know you were coming here tonight, he said. You didn't ask about my plans, she replied. Simple, factual, no accusation in it. He became aware of Jonathan Sterling, watching him with the patient, disinterested attention of a man who has seen a great many things and is content to wait and see what this particular thing turns out to be. "Mr. Sterling," William said, because he needed to say something to someone who might respond. "Carter." Sterling's voice was calm, dry as old wood. "Sit down if you like. We were just finishing." William stopped. "I'd like a word with my wife." "Of course you would," Sterling said. And then, without any particular heat or judgment, he picked up his water glass and turned slightly toward the window, as if the view outside had suddenly become of moderate interest, giving them privacy, without being asked, without making it a production. William looked at his wife. "Boy, you look well," he said. It was the most useless sentence he had ever spoken, and he knew it the moment it left his mouth. Elizabeth held his gaze. "The baby's been moving a great deal. She's very active." "She," William repeated. "I believe it's a girl." The midwife agrees. He had not known this. He had not been there to know this. The weight of that, the plainness of it, the simple factual wrongness of it, pressed against his ribs. "Elizabeth, Jonathan and I have a proposal to finalize," she said. Not unkindly, just clearly, the way she spoke when she was done with a thing. "We've been working on it for several months." "Your harbor proposal?" William said. Something moved through her eyes, quick, then gone. "Yes. The one I told you didn't have merit." "The one you weren't interested in reviewing," she said. "Which is a different thing." He stood there for a moment. "When did you contact Sterling?" "About 8 months ago," she said. "Before—" She paused. Chose her words with the precision of someone who has given a great deal of thought to exactly how much to say. "Before many things. Before she found out about Caroline. Before she stopped waiting. Before she decided that if her husband was going to be somewhere else, she was going to be somewhere too." "I should have listened to you," William said. Elizabeth looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "You should have." Then she turned back to Jonathan Sterling. William walked back through the dining room. He was aware dimly that Caroline was still at their table, that people were watching, that the maitre d' was hovering somewhere in his peripheral vision. He sat down. He did not look at Caroline. He looked at the wall. "Well," Caroline said after a long moment. "She's fine," William said. "That's not what I asked." He picked up his wine glass, set it back down without drinking. "She built a partnership with the most powerful man in Massachusetts," he said. "By herself. With an idea I threw away in 4 minutes." Caroline was quiet. "She's 7 months pregnant," he said. "And she came here tonight dressed like she belongs in any room she walks into. And some part of her—" He stopped, pressed his jaw together. "Some part of her was hoping I'd notice." "How do you know that?" "Because I know my wife," he said, and then quietly, "Or I used to." He left the restaurant before dessert was served. He stood outside on Federal Street in the warm July dark, listening to the harbor sounds, ropes and water, and the distant bell of a buoy, and he tried to remember when he had last asked Elizabeth how she was sleeping. He could not. He tried to remember the last conversation they had had that wasn't about household management, or social calendar, or what was expected of them at some function or another. He could not. He tried to remember the last time Elizabeth had looked at him with anything other than that calm, patient, carefully maintained nothing. He thought about the harbor proposal. 12 pages. Drafted herself. He had not read it. He had not even picked it up from where she had set it on his desk. He had told her she didn't understand how business worked. Elizabeth Whitmore, who had managed her father's accounts at age 15, who had restructured the Carter Maritime ledgers in her first 6 months of marriage and found 4 separate inefficiencies that William's own hired accountant had missed, who had quietly, without credit or acknowledgement, done the work of 3 people, while also learning to run a household and learning to be alone. He had told her she didn't understand. The July air was warm and smelled of low tide and pine pitch and the smoke of someone's pipe from somewhere down the street. William Carter stood on the sidewalk outside the harbor house, and for the first time in years, let himself feel how cold the inside of his chest had gotten. Inside the restaurant, Elizabeth watched the door close behind her husband. Jonathan did not comment. He waited until the waiter came and refilled their water glasses, and then he said, "Should we continue?" "Please," Elizabeth said. She turned back to the papers on the table. Her hand was steady. Her voice was clear. The baby moved under her ribs, a slow, rolling pressure that she had come to find oddly comforting, like a reminder that something was growing even while other things were ending. "The northern berths," she said. "If we can secure the lease before the end of August, we avoid the winter pricing adjustment." Sterling nodded. "I agree. I've already spoken to Alderman Rowe. He's sympathetic. And the labor contracts. I'll handle the renegotiation on my side. I want you to look over the terms before I sign anything." She nodded. Across the restaurant at table 7, Caroline Hayes was sitting very still. Elizabeth did not look at her. She had known about Caroline for 8 months. She had not screamed. She had not thrown things. She had not written letters or made accusations or done any of the things that a woman in her position was perhaps expected to do. She had done something else. She had gotten up in the morning every morning, and she had done the work in front of her. When her father's solicitor in Hartford had written asking if she wanted to re-examine the terms of her dowry trust, now that she was expecting, she had written back immediately with 6 very precise questions. When Jonathan Sterling had sent a letter of inquiry about her harbor proposal, her husband had evidently mentioned it to a mutual acquaintance who had mentioned it to Sterling, which was ironic. She thought, given that William had dismissed it, she had written back within the week. She had spent the past 8 months building something, not out of spite, not to make William feel a particular way, but because she had finally quietly and without drama decided that her life would not consist entirely of waiting for a man to look at her. "You handled that well," Jonathan said when the waiter had stepped away again. "Handled what?" "Carter coming over." She considered this. "I didn't handle anything. I just answered his questions." "You kept your composure." "I've had practice," she said, and something about the flatness of those 3 words made Jonathan go briefly still. He was a man who had been married twice, once badly, and he understood something about the kind of composure that is learned rather than felt. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, quietly, carefully, the way a man asks a question when he is not entirely certain he has the right to. Elizabeth looked at him steadily. "Long enough that I stopped counting," she said, "and short enough that I haven't given up on the possibility that it doesn't have to define the rest of my life." Sterling nodded slowly. "That's a careful answer. It's an honest one." They finished dinner. Jonathan helped her with her coat in the entrance hall, and then he walked her to the carriage and handed her up with the same quiet, unhurried courtesy he had shown all evening. "I'll have the final terms drawn up by Thursday," he said. "I'll review them Friday morning," she said. He stepped back, looked at her for a moment. "Elizabeth." His voice had changed slightly, gone a degree warmer. "Whatever happens next in your private life is your business entirely. But I want you to know the work we're doing together has value, real value, whatever else you are carrying right now." She looked at him. Something in her throat pulled tight. She did not let it show. "Thank you, Jonathan," she said. "Good night, Mrs. Carter." The carriage moved. She did not cry on this way home. She had not cried in a very long time. She pressed her hand to the side of her belly and felt the baby move and thought about August and the lease and the labor contracts and the things she would need to review by Friday. The carriage rolled through the warm Boston night. Somewhere behind her, in a restaurant on Federal Street, her husband was sitting with a woman who thought she had won something, and Elizabeth Carter, 7 months pregnant and entirely alone, was calculating the return on a harbor development that would within 4 years prove to be the most profitable investment in Massachusetts coastal real estate in a generation. She was not waiting anymore. She was not hoping. She was building. And the only question left, the question she had not yet answered and was not certain she would ever be able to answer, was whether William Carter would still be a man worth building anything with. By the time the carriage stopped in front of their house on Beacon Street, she had put that question away. There were more pressing things. There were always more pressing things. She went inside, took off her mother's earrings, and set them on the dressing table, and went to bed. She was asleep before William came home. He sat in the parlor until past midnight. He did not light a lamp. He sat in the dark and listened to the sounds of the house, the tick of the mantel clock, the settle of old timber, the distant hollow sound of fog rolling in off the harbor. He thought about 12 pages of careful work set on his desk and dismissed in 4 minutes. He thought about a woman laughing at a restaurant table with a man who bothered to listen. He thought about the earrings she had been wearing, his mother's earrings, which Elizabeth had always worn with a reverence he had never quite acknowledged. He thought about the way she had looked at him across the Harbor House dining room, not with anger, not with pain, with the calm, finished expression of a woman who had already made peace with something. That expression, more than anything else about the evening, was what he could not put down, because William Carter was smart enough, even in his worst moments, to understand what it meant when a woman stopped looking at you like she was waiting for you to change. It meant she had stopped waiting. And once a woman like Elizabeth Whitmore stopped waiting. He pressed his hands flat against his knees. He sat in the dark for a long time. Then he went upstairs. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom for a moment and looked at his wife sleeping. The room was quiet. The curtains moved slightly in the summer night air. Elizabeth was on her side, one hand beneath her cheek, breathing steadily. She looked in sleep like the girl she had been when he married her. Except she wasn't that girl anymore. And the thing that hit him, quiet and absolute and almost physical in its force, was that he was the reason she wasn't. He had taken a remarkable woman and spent 4 years making her feel invisible, and now she was becoming visible to someone else. And there was no one to blame for that but himself. He went to his own room. He did not sleep. William Carter did not sleep that night. He lay in the dark of his separate room and stared at the ceiling and listened to the house breathe around him. The mantel clock in the hallway marked every quarter hour with a sound that felt in the silence almost accusatory. Somewhere down the hall, Elizabeth was sleeping. Or not sleeping. He didn't know. That was the thing that kept finding him in the dark, how little he knew about what she did with her hours anymore. He had been away from his own marriage for so long that it had started conducting itself without him. At 2:30 in the morning, he got up and went to his study. The lamp was low. He turned it up and stood at his desk and looked at the surface of it, the contracts, the ledgers, the letters from his fleet captains in Baltimore and Providence and New York. Everything that had consumed him for 3 years. Everything he had told himself was the most important thing. He opened the bottom right drawer. He already knew what he would find there. He had known since the moment he sat in the dark at the Harbor House and heard himself say the words out loud for the first time 12 pages. Drafted herself. He had dismissed it in 4 minutes. The drawer held a stack of papers, slightly yellowed at the edges now. 3 years old. Set there by his own hand on the evening Elizabeth had brought them to him and never once touched again. He lifted the stack and sat down. He read for 2 hours. By the time the first gray light of morning pressed against the study windows, William Carter had read his wife's harbor proposal 3 times. He had filled half a page with notes in the margins. He had identified without any pleasure whatsoever exactly 6 points at which the proposal was not just sound, but visionary, forecasting shipping lane shifts that had in the intervening 3 years occurred almost precisely as she predicted. He set the papers down. He pressed his hands flat on the desk and looked at them. She had been right, about all of it, and he had told her she didn't understand how business worked. He sat with that for a long time. Downstairs, Elizabeth was already awake. She had been awake since 5, which was nothing unusual. The baby made sleeping past a certain hour impossible, not painful, just insistent, a series of small pressures and movements that served as their own kind of alarm. She didn't mind. She had come to think of the early hours as hers in a way the rest of the day wasn't. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the draft contract from Sterling's solicitor when she heard William's footsteps on the stairs. She did not look up. He came into the kitchen doorway and stopped. "You're up early," he said. "I'm always up early," she said. "You know that." He didn't respond to that immediately, which told her he was aware that he probably should have known it, but wasn't entirely certain. "Tea," she said. "Please." She poured a second cup, set it at the far end of the table. He sat down. She went back to reading the contract. They sat in silence for almost 2 minutes. It was a specific kind of silence, not the easy quiet of two people comfortable together, but the weighted, careful silence of two people deciding how much truth to allow into the room. William broke it first. "I read your proposal last night," he said. Elizabeth's eyes moved to the end of the line she was reading. She finished it, set the contract down. Then she looked at him. "Which proposal?" "You know which proposal." She held his gaze. "The harbor development." "Yes. You read it." "3 times," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her face that he couldn't fully read. Not satisfaction, not anger, not grief. Something compound. Something that had too many layers to name quickly. "3 years ago," she said. "I know. I spent 4 months on it. I know that now. You told me I didn't understand the industry." "Elizabeth, I'm not saying it to wound you, William." Her voice was level, careful. "I'm saying it because I want you to understand the specific nature of what happened. You didn't just dismiss the proposal, you dismissed the person who made it." He looked at her. "I know," he said. The words were quiet, plain. "You were right. About the shipping lanes, the timing, the Sterling partnership, all of it. I went back and checked against the harbor reports from the last 3 years. Everything you projected happened." "I know it did," she said simply. "I've been watching." Of course she had. She had watched her own correct predictions play out from the sidelines, while he continued to build the company she had helped stabilize, and told himself he had done it alone. He picked up his tea, set it down. The words he wanted to say were backed up somewhere behind his ribs, and he couldn't quite get them in the right order. "Why didn't you fight harder for it?" he said finally. "The proposal. You brought it to me once, and when I dismissed it, I just what? You didn't push back. You let it go." Elizabeth looked at him for a long moment. "William," she said quietly, "how many times had I pushed back before that, and had it make any difference?" He had no answer for that. She picked up her tea and held it with both hands. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window, and it caught the side of her face, and she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I learned early in our marriage," she said, "that when you had decided something, pushing back only made you more certain you were right. So I stopped. I stopped pushing back, and I started doing things a different way." She paused. "It took me longer than it should have, but I learned. By going around me. By going forward," she said. "There's a difference." William left for his office at 8 without resolving anything, because there was nothing to resolve in a kitchen before breakfast with 12 pages of evidence that he had spent 3 years being wrong about the most important things. He walked to the offices on Long Wharf because he needed the air and the movement and the particular kind of noise that the harbor made in the morning, the ropes and the rigging and the bellowing of men working, which had always been able to clear his head. Today, it did not clear anything. He was halfway down the pier when he nearly walked into Thomas Aldridge, his second in command, who was coming the other direction with a stack of manifests and the look of a man who had already been at work for 2 hours. "Carter." Thomas fell into step beside him. "You look terrible." "Thank you." "Something happened." "I ran into Sterling last night," William said. Thomas was quiet for exactly the right amount of time. The amount of time it takes a man who knows a great deal to decide how much he is going to pretend not to know. How was he? He was with Elizabeth. Thomas stopped walking. William stopped too, turned to look at him. You knew, William said. It was not a question, and Thomas Aldridge was not the kind of man who bothered denying things that were plainly true. She came to me 3 months ago, Thomas said carefully. She wanted to know if I had contact information for Sterling's solicitor. I gave it to her. She made me promise not to mention it to you. And you kept that promise. She's my employer's wife, Thomas said. But she's also... He stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. Carter, I've worked for you for 6 years. And in 6 years, I have watched Elizabeth quietly do things that kept this company afloat during 2 of the worst seasons we've had, without credit, without acknowledgement, and without complaint. When she asked me for a name, I gave her a name. I won't apologize for that. William looked at him. Thomas met his gaze steadily, uncomfortably but steadily. How long has she been working with Sterling? William said. 8 months, maybe a little more. And the proposal she brought him is yours? Thomas said. The harbor plan. It's the same one she brought you 3 years ago. She rebuilt it, updated it, added the new lane projections. She's been working on it in the evenings from what I understand. He paused. The northern berth lease alone is worth more than your entire fall shipping season, if they close it before August. I know what it's worth, William said shortly. Thomas was quiet. Why didn't you tell me? William said. Because you didn't ask, Thomas said. And because if I'm honest with you, and I think you know I usually am, I wasn't entirely certain you deserved to know. William looked at him sharply. Thomas didn't flinch. You asked me once what the difference was between a good businessman and a great one. You remember what you told me. A great one knows what he has before he loses it. Right, Thomas said. You told me that. He picked up his manifests and tucked them under his arm. I've been waiting 3 years for you to take your own advice. He walked away down the pier. William stood and watched him go, and did not say anything because there was nothing to say to a truth delivered that cleanly. Caroline came to the office at 10. He had not asked her to come. She came anyway the way she sometimes did, arriving with the confidence of a woman who had never in her experience been unwelcome. She was wearing a pale green dress, and her hair was done with the particular care of a woman who was about to say something she had prepared. She closed the office door behind her and looked at him across the width of his desk. You didn't come back last night, she said. I went home. I know, I waited for almost an hour. She said it without accusation. She had learned that accusation didn't work with William Carter and had adjusted accordingly. I want to talk about what happened. Caroline, let me finish. She came forward and sat in the chair across from his desk, the chair reserved for business clients, which she had never sat in before. He noticed that. I have been patient with you for 8 months. I have been understanding about the complications of your situation. I have never made demands or created difficulties. I think you know that's true. It's true, he said. What happened last night at the restaurant? She paused, chose her next words the way someone chooses footing on uncertain ground. I understand what it looked like. But you need to understand that Sterling is a business contact. Your wife is a clever woman who found an opportunity and took it. That doesn't change anything between us. William looked at her. She was beautiful. She was composed. She was saying exactly the right things, in exactly the right order, with the precision of someone who had thought it through. And he felt nothing. Not nothing exactly, but a new kind of nothing. A nothing that had a specific shape, which was the shape of looking at someone clearly for the first time after a long period of not looking. Caroline, he said, how much do you know about Elizabeth's proposal? She blinked. The harbor project, only what's generally known in business circles. That Sterling is involved, that there's a coastal lease in discussion. Do you know who originated the idea? She held his gaze. Your wife, presumably. 3 years ago, William said. She brought it to me 3 years ago, 12 pages, 4 months of research. I told her she didn't understand the industry, and I put the papers in a drawer. He paused. I read them last night. She was entirely correct. If I had moved on her proposal in 1814, we would currently hold the most profitable coastal shipping contracts in New England. Caroline said nothing. I gave you the evening she deserved, he said, and I gave her the silence she didn't. William. I'm not saying this to hurt you, he said. I'm saying it because I've spent the last 12 hours being honest with myself about what I've done, and I owe it to you to be honest with you too. He looked at her steadily. This has to stop. What's between us? It has to stop. She was quiet for a long moment. Something moved through her face, not the dramatic grief of a woman who expected this conversation, but the particular stillness of a woman who had been hoping until this exact moment that it might not come. Because of last night, she said quietly. Because you saw her with someone else. Because last night made me see myself clearly, he said. And I don't think you deserve what I've been giving you either. You're waiting for me to choose you. I've been letting you wait for 8 months while I've had no intention of ever doing it. He paused. That's not something a man does to a woman he respects. Caroline stood up. She was very still for a moment. Then she said quietly and without heat, You're going to try to fix it. I don't know if it can be fixed, but you're going to try. I have to try, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face had gone very calm, the calm of someone putting something down that they had been carrying for too long anyway. She may not want you to, Caroline said. I know. She's further along than you think, she said. Not just with the pregnancy. She's been building something, William, something she owns, something that doesn't require your name on it to be real. She picked up her gloves from the desk where she had set them. You might get home and find out she doesn't need the story to end the way you're planning it. She left without drama. He sat with that for a while. 3 days passed. He did not go back to Caroline. He had meant what he said, and he was not a man who unmade decisions easily once they were made. He went home every evening that week. He arrived before dark. He sat at the dinner table with Elizabeth and said things, not profound things, not the sweeping declarations of a man who has read too many novels. Just ordinary things. How was she feeling? Had she heard from her mother in Hartford? Was the baby keeping her up? Elizabeth answered. She answered politely, clearly without warmth and without coldness. The way a woman answers someone she is watching from a careful distance. On the 4th evening, he arrived home to find her in the sitting room with ledgers spread across the low table. She had 3 different documents open and was cross-referencing them with the focused attention of someone deep inside a problem. She didn't look up when he came in. How was the shipping office? She said. Busy. Baltimore contract came through. He set his hat down. The one for the October grain routes. She made a small notation in the margin of one of the pages. Did Thomas handle the tonnage calculation himself, or did he bring in the new clerk? William stopped. Thomas, he said. How do you know about the Baltimore contract? She looked up. Thomas mentioned it was in negotiation when I spoke to him last week. I had questions about the grain weight limits because the northern harbor capacity will need to account for additional freight if we're sharing lane access with your Baltimore routes. She said it plainly, practically, as if this were entirely obvious. You're coordinating your harbor project around my shipping routes, William said. Our shipping routes would benefit from the harbor expansion, she said. It seemed foolish to ignore that. Jonathan agrees. Jonathan. Sterling, she said mildly. We're on first names by now. He sat down in the chair across from her. She went back to the ledgers. He watched her work for a moment. What are you calculating? He said. She paused, looked up again. Something moved through her face. Wariness, he thought, the careful look of someone deciding whether to open a door. The labor cost projections for the first 2 years of operation, she said. There's a variable I can't quite... She stopped. What's the variable? She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned the ledger toward him and pointed. He leaned forward, looked at the column of figures, looked at the notation in her neat hand beside it. It's the tidal schedule, he said immediately. The northern berths have an 8-hour access window per day based on the tides. If you're calculating daily labor hours at a full 12, you're overstating costs by... He picked up her pencil and made a quick calculation in the margin, about 30%. Elizabeth looked at what he had written. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. That's the problem. So the actual labor cost is significantly lower, which changes the return timeline by approximately 14 months, he said. 11, she said. If we hire locally and avoid the Newport labor rates. He looked at her. She looked at him. Something hung in the space between them. Not forgiveness, not warmth, but something that was very quietly the shape of what they had once been together. Two sharp minds working on the same problem, finding the same answer from different directions. She took the pencil back from him. Thank you, she said, formally, carefully. Elizabeth? Not tonight, William. Her voice was quiet, final. I'm not ready for whatever conversation you want to have tonight. Please. He closed his mouth. He sat back. All right, he said. She went back to the ledgers. He stayed in the chair across from her, not speaking, and after a while he picked up the newspaper from the side table and opened it, because being in the room was something, even if it was a small something, and he had enough sense left to know the difference between small somethings and nothing at all. They sat like that for an hour and a half. When she finally closed the ledgers and gathered them into a neat stack, she stood and paused and said without looking at him, "The title window correction makes the numbers considerably stronger." "I know," he said. "I'll mention it to Jonathan on Friday." "Of course," he said. She left the room. He stayed in the chair. He stayed there a long time. And the letter from Caroline arrived on Thursday. Short, clean. The kind of letter that says what it means and nothing more. William, I will not write again. I want you to understand that I do not believe you are a bad man. I believe you are a man who made choices without thinking about what they cost other people. I hope you are better going forward than you have been. I will also say this, she is more remarkable than you have had the decency to notice. I noticed, and I was supposed to be your reason not to. That should tell you something. CH. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in the fireplace. He did not watch it burn. He walked out of the study and down the hallway and stood at the foot of the stairs for a moment and thought about going up and saying whatever needed to be said. Then he thought about what Elizabeth had said. Not tonight. He went back to work. He stayed downstairs. He was learning slowly badly, with the lurching, unsteady effort of a man learning something he should have understood years ago, that wanting to fix something is not the same as being ready to fix it. And that a woman who has spent years being dismissed learns to recognize the difference between a man who has genuinely changed and a man who has simply been frightened. He had been frightened. He was not yet certain he had changed, but he was starting to understand the distance between those two things. And for the first time in years, he was paying attention to something other than himself. On Friday morning, Elizabeth came downstairs, dressed to go out. The pale blue, again a different gown, but the same calm, deliberate elegance. Her hair was done. She was carrying a leather folio under one arm. "Sterling's office," William said. He was at the breakfast table. "Yes." She was putting on her gloves at the hallway table. "We're reviewing the final lease terms this morning." He stood up. She paused. He didn't know exactly what he was going to say. He had not planned this. He had been getting better at not planning things and simply saying what was true. "The 11-month timeline," he said. "If you present it with the title correction included, and if you reference the comparable return from the Providence Port expansion in 1813, Sterling will move faster than he was planning to." Elizabeth looked at him. Her hand stilled on the second glove. "The Providence report is in the Maritime Archives," he said. "Second shelf, Eastern Ledger, year 1813. Thomas has access." She looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't read her face exactly, but something in it had shifted fractionally quietly from the careful nothing she had been giving him to something slightly less defended. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because it will help," he said simply. "And because it's your project." She finished with the glove. She picked up the folio. She walked to the front door, and then she stopped with her hand on the latch and said without turning around, "The Providence reference is a good one. I hadn't considered it." She opened the door and walked out. William stood in the hallway and looked at the closed door for a moment. He had not asked her to stay. He had not asked her to forgive him. He had not made it about himself. He had just for once, possibly for the first time in longer than he wanted to count, given her something and asked for nothing back. It was a small thing. But in that house, in that hallway, on that particular Friday morning in July of 1817, it was the first truly honest thing he had done in a very long time. And somewhere behind the closed front door, walking toward a carriage that would take her to a meeting that was entirely her own, Elizabeth Carter allowed herself for one brief and private moment to feel something she had almost stopped believing was possible. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of hope. She tucked it away carefully, the way you tuck away something fragile, something that might still break. And she went to her meeting. The Friday meeting ran 4 hours. Elizabeth came home at 2:30, with the leather folio tucked under her arm, and the particular quiet of a woman who has just accomplished something significant and has not yet decided what to do with the feeling. William was in the study when she returned. He heard the front door, heard her steps in the hallway, heard her pause at the foot of the stairs. He stayed at his desk. He had learned in the past week that moving toward her too quickly was the surest way to make her step back. But then she appeared in the study doorway. She was still wearing her coat. "The Providence reference worked," she said. He looked up. "Sterling moved the signing to next Wednesday," she said. "He said the return timeline changed his confidence in the project considerably." She paused. "He asked where I'd found the reference. I told him I'd had help." William set down his pen. "You didn't have to say that." "I know I didn't have to," she said. "I said it because it was true." She looked at him for a moment, that careful measuring look she had been giving him all week, the one that was neither warm nor cold, but simply honest. Then she went upstairs. He turned back to his desk. His hands were not quite steady. He pressed them flat on the wood for a moment and breathed. It was not forgiveness. He knew that. He was not foolish enough to mistake a single acknowledged truth for the rebuilding of 4 years of damage. But it was something, and he was learning to pay attention to something. Wednesday came with the particular weight of days that matter. Sterling's solicitor had arranged the signing at the offices on State Street, a formal affair with 3 lawyers present and enough paperwork to fill an afternoon. Elizabeth arrived before William, which he discovered when he came through the door and found her already seated at the long table, the folio open in front of her, speaking quietly with Sterling about an amendment to the labor clause. She looked up when he entered. "William?" "Not cold, not warm, precise." "Elizabeth." He took the chair across from her, not beside her. He was not going to presume. Jonathan Sterling studied him with the same patient, unhurried attention he had turned on him at the Harbor House 2 weeks ago. Then he nodded once and went back to the amendment. The signing took 2 hours. Elizabeth caught 2 errors in the drafted contract: that her own solicitor had missed a transposed figure in the birth lease rate, and a clause that would have locked them into a labor rate for 5 years instead of 3. She caught both without announcement, simply turned the relevant pages to the solicitor and pointed, and the corrections were made. The second correction saved them approximately $3,000 over the contract term. Sterling's solicitor looked at her with the expression of a man revising his assessment of a situation he thought he had already fully understood. William said nothing. He was watching his wife work, and he was doing the kind of arithmetic that has nothing to do with numbers, the arithmetic of time, of what is lost and what remains of what a man has to offer a woman who has already proven she can do without him. When the last signature was made and the solicitors began gathering their papers, Sterling stood and shook Elizabeth's hand first, then William's. "Carter," Sterling said, "your wife has a better head for contract law than most of the lawyers in this city." "I know," William said. Sterling raised an eyebrow, the slight, barely perceptible kind that asks a question without asking it. "I'm learning," William said quietly, "that there are a great many things about my wife I should have known considerably sooner." Sterling looked at him for a moment. Then, with the economy of a man who doesn't waste words, "That's an honest answer." He left with his solicitor. Elizabeth was refastening the clasp on her folio. She had heard what William said to Sterling. Her hands did not pause in their work, but something around her jaw had changed slightly. A fractional easing, the kind that happens when something expected and braced for turns out to be different than anticipated. She stood and pulled on her gloves. "I'm having dinner with my mother's cousin on Thursday," she said. "She's visiting from Hartford." "I remember," he said. "Mrs. Howell." She stopped with one glove half on. He had remembered. She finished with the glove and said nothing. Thursday evening, alone in the house, William went to the kitchen and made himself tea, the way the housekeeper made it badly with too much water, and sat at the table where 2 weeks ago Elizabeth had been reading Sterling's draft contract in the early morning light. He thought about Caroline's letter. "She is more remarkable than you have had the decency to notice." He thought about Thomas on the pier. "I've been waiting 3 years for you to take your own advice." He thought about Elizabeth in that contract room, turning pages, pointing, saving $3,000 with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped needing to announce what she was capable of. He thought about the ribbon, the one he had found in his own coat pocket 8 months ago. Caroline's ribbon, which he had been careless enough to carry home, and realized sitting in the quiet kitchen that Elizabeth must have found it too, before he had. She must have seen it, understood it, and said absolutely nothing. She had found out about Caroline, and she had said nothing. She had gone to Sterling and built a business partnership and said nothing. She had spent 8 months preparing for a future that she was not certain would include him, and she had done it all with the same careful composure she brought to everything, without drama, without cruelty, without any of the weapons she could have used and chose not to. He pressed his hands over his face. He sat like that for a while. There was a particular kind of reckoning that comes not from being caught, but from finally clearly understanding the size of what you have done. Not the act itself, but the accumulated weight of it. The years of small dismissals, the proposal in the drawer, the evenings away. The way he had made a remarkable woman feel like a piece of furniture so gradually that neither of them had noticed it happening until she stopped waiting to be seen. He had not been cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruelty could be pointed to, argued with, defended against. What he had done had no sharp edges. It had just been an absence, long, slow, complete, until the person beside him had quietly begun to fill the space with other things. He took his hands away from his face. He got up. He went upstairs. He stood in the doorway of Elizabeth's room, her room, not theirs, not anymore, and he looked at the things on her dressing table. The pearl earrings in their small dish. The Hartford letters stacked neatly by the mirror. A book she was reading, face down, spine carefully protected. A small drawing on paper pinned to the side of the mirror, a rough sketch of a harbor layout, hand-drawn with notations in her writing. The harbor project. She had been working on it even here, even in the private hours before sleep, even in the time that was supposed to be entirely hers. He stood there a long moment. Then he said quietly to no one, to the room, to the earrings in their dish, to the careful fact of a woman he had failed, "I'm going to do better." It wasn't a promise to her. She wasn't there to hear it. It was a promise to himself. Because he understood finally that this was how it had to start. Not with declarations to the person you had wronged, but with something smaller and harder. With the private decision to be different before you had earned the right to say it out loud. The next 3 weeks were not dramatic. They were quiet, steady. The way the real work of anything is usually quiet and steady rather than sweeping and sudden. William came home every evening. He sat at dinner and he asked questions and he listened to the answers, not with the distracted half-attention of a man waiting to speak, but with the real attention of a man paying his debts one sentence at a time. He learned things he should have known. He learned that Elizabeth had been corresponding with her father's solicitor in Hartford since February, quietly restructuring her dowry trust into an independent holding. He learned that she had been studying Massachusetts property law since the winter on her own, from borrowed books, because she had anticipated that the harbor project would require her to understand land contracts. He learned that she had a friendship with Mrs. Aldridge Thomas's wife that had been developing for 2 years, and that she had never mentioned to him because, as she told him plainly one evening when he asked, "You weren't asking about my friendships." He learned that she was afraid, not of him, not of Caroline, not of the future in any abstract sense. She was afraid of the baby quietly, privately, in the way women in 1817 were afraid of things they had watched take other women without warning or mercy. She had not said so. She had not said so to anyone. He discovered it by accident on a Tuesday evening when he came upstairs to find her sitting at the edge of her bed with a letter in her hands and an expression on her face that she quickly composed when she heard him. "Elizabeth, I'm fine. You're not." She looked at him. Something wavered. She was very tired of pretending to be all right about everything, he realized. She had been doing it for so long it had become its own kind of exhaustion. "It's a letter from Margaret Forsyth," she said. "You remember Margaret?" He remembered. A woman from their social circle, married 2 years after Elizabeth. What happened? Elizabeth looked at the letter. "She lost the baby," she said. Her voice was even. "Third one. They don't think she'll—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. William crossed the room and sat beside her on the edge of the bed. She didn't move away. "Elizabeth," he said. "I'm not going to fall apart," she said quickly. "I'm perfectly well. The midwife says everything is—" "I'm not asking you not to fall apart," he said. She stopped. He looked at her. "You're allowed to be afraid. You don't have to be composed about everything in front of me." She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her face broke, not dramatically, not with tears. Just a quiet fracturing around the edges of all that careful control. She looked away, pressed the letter flat against her knee. "I am afraid," she said, very quietly. "I have been afraid since March, and I haven't— There wasn't anyone I could—" She stopped again. "Tell," he finished. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He had made himself into someone she could not tell. He sat there. He did not reach for her immediately. He understood, slowly, painfully learning it the way he was learning everything else right now, that the most important thing was not to make this about his need to comfort her. The most important thing was just to stay. So he stayed. After a while she said, "The midwife said she's strong. The baby. She can feel it." "Then trust the midwife," William said. "And tell me what you need." Elizabeth looked at him. He understood a question she had not been asked in a very long time. "I need you to actually be here," she said. "Not here in the building. Here." She pressed her hand briefly against her own sternum. "Present. When something happens, I need—" Her voice caught. "I need to not be alone in this house when it happens." "I will be here," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The wariness was still there. It did not vanish because a man said words, and Elizabeth Whitmore Carter had never been a woman who confused words with reality. "All right," she said finally. "All right." She stood. She went to her bureau and put the letter away. He stood too and moved toward the door. "William." He turned. She was standing with her back to him, hands on the bureau, and she said to the drawer rather than to him, "Margaret was alone when it happened. Her husband was at his club." A beat. He didn't think he needed to change his plans. William stood in the doorway. "I'll be here," he said again. Quietly. Plainly. "Whatever evening, whatever hour, I'll be here." She nodded. Once. He left the room. He went downstairs, and he sat in the parlor in the dark, and he did not allow himself to think about how close he had come to being exactly that man, the one at the club, the one who didn't think he needed to change his plans. He did not allow himself to think about it, because it was too close to true. Tug. 3 days later, Carolyn Hayes got engaged. The news came through Boston's social circuit with the particular speed reserved for information that several people have been waiting to deliver. A merchant from Philadelphia, recently widowed, considerable fortune. The announcement was made at a dinner party William had not attended. Thomas told him at the office, carefully watching his face. William nodded. I hope she's happy, he said. Thomas watched him for another moment. That's all. That's all, William said. She deserves to be happy. She was waiting for something I was never going to give her. He picked up the manifest on his desk. The Philadelphia man is a better option than I was. Thomas let out a long breath that he had apparently been holding. Well, he said. All right then. Did Elizabeth know her? William asked. They moved in some of the same circles. Does Elizabeth know about the engagement? Probably by now. William thought about this. Good, he said. Then she doesn't have to wonder about it anymore. That evening, he came home to find Elizabeth in the sitting room with the ledgers again, and she looked up when he entered with an expression he could not quite identify, something cautious, something that was testing a question without asking it. I heard about Miss Hayes, she said. I know, he said. He sat down across from her. It's over. It was over the morning after the Harbor House. I want you to know that in plain terms. I should have said it in plain terms before now, and I didn't, and that was wrong. Elizabeth held his gaze. 8 months, she said, give or take. Yes. Did you love her? He considered the question seriously because she deserved a serious answer. No, he said. I thought I did for a time, but I know the difference now. What's the difference? She asked. Not cruelly, genuinely. He looked at her. Love is what makes you read someone's work at 2 a.m. and feel ashamed of yourself for not reading it sooner. What I felt for Caroline was easier than that. Something moved through Elizabeth's face. She looked back at the ledger. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said. Her voice was even. I need you to know that. I'm not there yet. I don't know how long it will take, and I can't promise what I'll decide when I get there. I know, he said, but I can see that you're trying, she said, and I want you to know that I see it. It was not an embrace. It was not a reunion. It was two people sitting across a room from each other in the honest aftermath of damage, and one of them saying, I see you trying. For now, that was enough. For now, that was everything. The social occasion that changed everything came on the 14th of August. The Whitmore Merchants Association hosted its annual summer dinner, a large formal affair, at the Somerset Club on Beacon Street, the kind that Boston's merchant class attended out of obligation, and where reputations were quietly built or quietly damaged over the course of an evening. William had attended every year for 6 years. This year, 2 days before the event, Elizabeth came to his study. The Whitmore dinner, she said. I'd like to attend. He looked up. Of course. I mean on my own terms, she said. Not as your wife attending your event. Sterling will be there, several of his associates. The Harbor project is still technically private, but it won't be for much longer, and when it becomes public, I would prefer that the relevant people in that room already know who Elizabeth Carter is. He held her gaze. All right. She waited. He understood she was waiting for the other thing, the objection, the qualification, the subtle redirection. Tell me what you need from me that evening, he said instead. She blinked, just slightly. I need you to introduce me by my own expertise, she said. Not as your wife, as a principal in the Sterling Harbor development. Done, he said. She studied him for a moment. And I need you to let me lead my own conversations, she said. If I'm speaking with Sterling's people and you have an opinion, let me finish first. Done. She looked at him as if she were waiting for the catch. There was no catch. All right, she said quietly. Chisold. The Somerset Club was full the night of the Whitmore dinner. They arrived together but walked separately through the first hour. Elizabeth moving through the room with the particular purpose of a woman who knew exactly who she was looking for and exactly what she wanted to say. William following his own circuit and watching her from across the room with the attention of a man studying something he had looked at for years without ever actually seeing. He watched her stop and speak with Henry Parrish, one of Sterling's land partners, who turned to face her with the politely dismissive attention he reserved for wives making small talk, and then shift visibly within 3 minutes, as Elizabeth laid out the return projections on the northern berth lease with the precision of someone who had the numbers memorized because she had built them herself. Parrish called over his business partner. His business partner called over a third man. Within 15 minutes, Elizabeth had an audience of 4, and she was answering questions with the steady, unshowy confidence of someone who has never needed to perform her competence because she has always simply had it. William was standing near the far window when Jonathan Sterling appeared beside him. "Your wife," Sterling said, "watching the same scene is going to be very difficult for this city to ignore much longer." "I know," William said. Sterling glanced at him. "How are things at home?" It was a direct question for a formal occasion, but Sterling was a man who said what he meant. "Slow," William said honestly, "but moving." Sterling nodded. He took a sip of his drink. "She told me some time ago that she wasn't certain her marriage would survive what had happened. She wasn't asking for advice. She was just informing me, I suppose, of the context." He paused. "I told her that I had been married twice. That the first time I was too young and too certain and too absent. That I lost that marriage not to any single event, but to 1,000 small failures of attention." William said nothing. "She listened to that very carefully," Sterling said. "She didn't say much in response, but she listened." He turned to look at William directly. "A man can change, Carter. I've seen it done. But it requires him to stop waiting for the woman to meet him halfway and start walking the whole damn road himself." He moved away into the crowd. William stood at the window. Across the room, Elizabeth had finished with Parrish's group and was moving on. She paused near the doorway to the adjoining salon, and for a brief moment, she looked back across the room, not searching, not hoping, just the automatic sweep of a woman checking her bearings. Her gaze found William. He held it. He did not smile. He did not gesture. He simply held her gaze and let her see him, seeing her present, paying attention, not looking anywhere else. Something moved through her face. Quick, private, gone before anyone else in the room could have caught it. Then she turned and walked into the salon. He put down his glass. He crossed the room. He followed her. Not to interrupt, not to redirect, not to manage how the evening went. He followed her because wherever Elizabeth Carter was in this room was where he intended to be. That was all. He was beginning to understand how it started. Not with the grand gesture, not with the sweeping declaration that made a good story later. With showing up. Consistently. Without agenda. Without expectation. Without the subtle demand that his presence be acknowledged and rewarded. Just showing up. The salon was quieter than the main room. Elizabeth had found Sterling near the bookcase and was speaking with him and a woman William recognized as the wife of the harbor commissioner. The commissioner's wife was asking Elizabeth something, leaning forward slightly with the interest of someone who has just discovered a person far more interesting than expected. William stopped near the doorway and did not insert himself. He watched his wife hold court. He watched a woman who had spent 4 years being made invisible in her own home take up the space she had always deserved with the calm authority of someone who had stopped waiting for permission. And standing in that doorway in the warm August evening of 1817, in a room full of Boston's most prominent citizens, William Carter felt something break open in his chest. Not painfully. Not like breaking in the way that wounds, but the way something breaks when it has been rigid for too long and finally releases. It was not a simple feeling. It was not comfortable. It was the feeling of a man looking at what he almost lost and understanding with absolute and complete clarity that he did not deserve to have kept it, and that whether or not he got to keep it going forward depended entirely on what he did next. Not tonight. Not with a grand speech in a room full of people. Day by day. One true thing at a time. He straightened. He moved away from the doorway to give her the room. He went and found Thomas Aldridge near the fireplace and spent 20 minutes talking about the Baltimore contracts, and when Elizabeth came back through the main room an hour later, she passed close enough that he could have spoken, and he said only, Parrish's partner mentioned he'd like a follow-up meeting. "I know," she said. "I gave him Thursday." "Good," William said. She kept walking, but she was almost smiling. Parrish's follow-up meeting happened on Thursday, as Elizabeth had promised, and William found out about it the way he had been finding out about most things lately after the fact from Thomas, who mentioned it with the careful neutrality of a man who had learned to report information without editorializing. She met with Parrish and Hendricks for 2 hours, Thomas said, setting the Baltimore Manifest on William's desk. Hendricks wants in on the second phase of the harbor development. He's talking about bringing in 3 additional investors from the Providence circuit. William looked up. The second phase. There's a second phase, Thomas said. She's been designing it since June. Southern berth expansion. Doubles the initial capacity. William put down his pen. She didn't mention it. Thomas asked, and to his credit, he asked it without any satisfaction in his voice. We're still... William stopped. We're not there yet, in terms of what she shares with me. Thomas nodded, picked up the manifest again. For what it's worth, he said, Hendricks told Parrish that the Carter name on the project is an asset, that whatever your wife is building, having your fleet behind it makes it considerably more valuable to outside investors. He paused at the door. She knows that. I think she's always known it. She just needed to be the one deciding when and how to use it. He left. William sat alone in his office for a long moment. A second phase. She had been designing a second phase since June, while she was finding Caroline's ribbon in his coat pocket, while she was writing quiet letters to Hartford solicitors about her independent trust, while she was doing all the invisible work of preparing for a future she could not yet see clearly. She had been building something large enough to require a second phase. He picked up his pen again. He set it back down. He went home early for the first time in 3 years. Elizabeth was in the kitchen when he arrived, standing at the long table with her shoes off and her hair half undone, and a cup of cold tea at her elbow, surrounded by papers that he recognized as harbor survey documents. She was annotating something in the margin and did not hear him come in. He stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at her. This was her he understood, not the composed, gloved, carefully presented woman at the Harbor House or the Somerset Club. This was Elizabeth Carter in the private hours, tired, focused, working in her stockinged feet on something that mattered to her. He had never seen this version of her because he had never been home to see it. "You're back early," she said without looking up. She had heard him after all. "I wanted to be home," he said. She glanced up then, briefly. Something moved through her face. Not suspicion exactly, but the careful readjustment of someone recalibrating an expectation. "Are you hungry?" she said. Mrs. Hooper left something on the stove. "I'll get it myself," he said. "Don't stop working." She looked at him. He went to the stove, found the pot, found a bowl, served himself with the particular awkwardness of a man who has relied on household staff for too long and is aware of the irony. He sat down at the far end of the table from her papers, not crowding her, not inserting himself into her work. She watched him for a moment. "The second phase," she said. He looked up. "Thomas told you," she said. Not a question. "This morning." She was quiet for a moment, turning her pencil between her fingers. "I should have told you myself," she said. I kept it separate out of habit. The habit of not expecting you to be interested." "I know," he said. "I earned that habit." She set the pencil down. "Hendricks wants to move quickly. He's worried the Providence investors will find another opportunity if we take too long." "Hendricks is always worried about Providence investors," William said. "It's his default condition. Don't let him rush you." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. "That's what I told him," she said. "What did he say?" "He said I sounded like my husband." William looked at her. She looked at him. "I told him I'd take that as a compliment," she said quietly. Given the circumstances, he had no answer for that. He didn't need one. He picked up his spoon and went back to his bowl and let the moment sit without pressing it. And after a few seconds, Elizabeth picked up her pencil and went back to her annotations. And they stayed like that for an hour together in the kitchen in the late August afternoon, working and eating and saying nothing. And it was, he thought, the most honest hour they had spent in the same room in 4 years. The pregnancy had reached its final weeks by September. The midwife, Mrs. Garrett, came twice a week now. She was a compact, no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had delivered half of Beacon Hill and had the calm authority of someone who had seen every possible thing that could happen and had a plan for all of it. She approved of Elizabeth. William had the sense she was somewhat less certain about him, based on the particular quality of her silence whenever he appeared in the hallway during her visits. He stayed home, every evening as promised. He had rearranged 3 business meetings and declined 2 out-of-town trips to Baltimore and Providence, which Thomas had managed without comment, and with what William suspected was quiet satisfaction. One evening in the second week of September, he was in the study when he heard Elizabeth call his name. Not loudly, not in distress, just William. He was up and in the hallway in 4 seconds. She was standing at the top of the stairs, one hand on the banister, the other pressed flat against the side of her belly. Her face was very calm, but her eyes were doing something different from her face. "Get Mrs. Garrett," she said. He looked at her for exactly 1 second, long enough to see that she was steady, that this was the beginning and not the middle, that he had time. "Are you all right to stand there?" "Yes." "Go." He went. He was back with Mrs. Garrett within 40 minutes, and he spent the next 11 hours doing exactly what he had promised, being there. Not hovering, not panicking, not making Elizabeth manage his fear on top of her own. He stayed close enough to be present and far enough away to give Mrs. Garrett room to work, and when Elizabeth's hand reached out in the dark hours of the early morning, he took it without being asked and held it without letting go. At 4:37 in the morning on the 12th of September 1817, Anna Carter came into the world. She was small and furious and entirely perfect, and she announced herself with a cry that seemed much too large for someone that new to the enterprise of existing. Mrs. Garrett wrapped her and handed her to Elizabeth, who held her against her chest and went very still in the way that people go still when they are holding something they cannot believe is real. William was sitting in the chair by the bed. Elizabeth looked up at him. She didn't say anything. She just held the baby toward him slightly, not handing her over, not relinquishing anything, just showing him. He leaned forward. He looked at his daughter. Something happened in his chest that he did not have words for, and would not for a long time be able to describe accurately to anyone. It was not the comfortable, warming feeling he had expected. It was larger and more frightening than that. It was the feeling of suddenly understanding what is at stake. What has always been at stake. What he had been carelessly risking without ever fully grasping the weight of it. "Anna," Elizabeth said quietly. "Anna," he repeated. Mrs. Garrett, with the tact of a woman who had witnessed this particular human moment many times, found something to attend to on the other side of the room. "She has your jaw," Elizabeth said. "God help her," William said. Elizabeth laughed. It was a small, tired, genuine laugh. The kind that costs something to produce when you are exhausted and relieved and feeling too many things at once. He had made her laugh, not with performance, not with effort, just accidentally, honestly made her laugh. He held on to that. The weeks that followed Anna's birth were the hardest and the most clarifying of William Carter's adult life. He learned things no business ledger or shipping contract had ever required him to learn. He learned that a newborn's hunger does not observe business hours, and that the lamp in the nursery was always burning. He learned that Elizabeth was quieter after the birth than before, not withdrawn, but turned inward, all her considerable attention pointed at this new small person with an intensity that left no room for performance. He learned to be useful, not helpful in the way that announces itself. Useful in the quiet way, the way that gets things done, without requiring acknowledgement. He handled the household accounts for 3 weeks straight, so Elizabeth wouldn't have to. He met with Thomas every morning at home, instead of the office, so he didn't have to leave before noon. When Elizabeth's mother arrived from Hartford on the 3rd day, he managed the visit with a diplomacy he had not previously known he possessed, because Mrs. Whitmore's opinion of him had clearly been shaped by letters she had received from her daughter over the past year, and those letters had not, he surmised, been particularly flattering. "You look tired," Mrs. Whitmore said to him on the second day, with the particular tone that means something quite different. "I am tired," he said honestly. "We both are." She studied him. She was a compact, watchful woman in her 50s, with Elizabeth's eyes, and none of Elizabeth's restraint about using them. "My daughter wrote me in March," she said. "I won't tell you what she said." "You don't need to," William said. "I have a reasonably accurate idea. And now I'm trying to deserve better letters," he said. Mrs. Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. "Elizabeth has never needed saving," she said. "I want you to understand that clearly. She has managed and built and survived on her own resources for the entirety of your marriage. She doesn't need you to rescue anything." "I know that," William said. "What she needs," Mrs. Whitmore said, "is a partner. A genuine one. Someone who is present and paying attention and treats her work and her mind and her time as if they matter as much as his own." "I know that too," he said. "I'm working on being that person." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, "She told me about the harbor project. Both phases. She's going to change the eastern seaboard," William said. "The proposal she brought to me 3 years ago was better than anything my own team had developed. I told her she didn't understand the industry." "I know you did," Mrs. Whitmore said flatly. "I was wrong," he said, in the clearest and most complete sense of that word. Mrs. Whitmore held his gaze for another long moment. Then she said, "Tea," and moved toward the kitchen, which he understood was as close to a provisional approval as he was going to receive for some time. He followed her. October arrived, and with it the particular clarity that comes after a long summer of difficult things. Elizabeth had resumed work on the harbor project, not full days yet, but mornings while Anna slept with the enviable completeness of a child who has no idea how recently she wasn't in the world. Sterling had sent a note the week after the birth formal and warm congratulating them both, and noting that the Hendricks investors had confirmed their commitment to the second phase. One morning, William came into the study and found Elizabeth at his desk. She looked up without apology. "The survey maps were in here," she said. "I needed the 1814 coastal charts." "Use whatever you need," he said. She had the charts spread across the desk and was comparing them to her own hand-drawn survey. He sat down in the chair across from her, the client's chair again, still not presuming, and watched her work for a moment. "The second phase timeline," he said. "What's the constraint?" She glanced up. "Land acquisition. There are 3 parcels on the southern end that Sterling doesn't own yet. The owners know we want them now, and they're holding for price." "Who are the owners?" She named them. He was quiet for a moment. "I know one of them, Amos Birch. He owes me a conversation about the winter storage contracts. I've been renewing his grain storage lease for 3 years, and I've never pushed on the rate." He paused. "I could have a conversation with him, not a transaction, just a conversation. See what he actually wants." Elizabeth set down her pencil. She looked at him with the particular expression he had come to recognize over the past weeks. The one that was recalibrating something, updating an internal count of the ways he was different from what he had been. "That would be useful," she said carefully. "I'll talk to him this week," William said. "No pressure, no agenda, just find out what he needs." She nodded, went back to the charts. Then she said without looking up, "The first phase opens in April." "I know. Sterling wants to have a dinner, a proper announcement. Business community, press, the relevant political people." She paused. "He wants me to host it." "Here," William said. "Yes. He said the Carter name and the Carter house would carry more weight than his offices." She was still looking at the charts. "I wanted to ask you first." He understood what she was asking. Not permission. Elizabeth had stopped asking permission for things before most of their marriage, but something more considered than that. She was offering him a choice about whether this house, his name, his reputation would be used in service of something she had built. "Yes," he said immediately. "Of course. Whenever you want, however you want it done." She nodded, still not looking up. "Elizabeth," he said. She looked at him. I want you to know something, he said, and I'm not saying it to ask for anything in return. I need to say it plainly. He met her gaze. I am proud of you. I have been watching what you've built for the last 3 months, and I am... His voice did something unexpected, and he steadied it. I am genuinely deeply proud of what you've done, and I am ashamed that I made you do it without me. Silence. Elizabeth held his gaze. Her expression moved through several things in the space of a few seconds. Things he could not quite name, but could feel the way you feel, weather changing before you see it. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 4 years, she said quietly. I know, he said. I have a lot of ground to make up. She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, Amos Birch prefers to be approached in the morning, before noon. He doesn't make decisions after lunch. He told me that himself when I tried to meet with him in September. William almost smiled. Good to know. He also responds better if you already know something about him before you sit down. He restored his father's fishing boat last year. It's the thing he's most proud of. She picked up her pencil. That's a place to start. He understood she was giving him the tools to help her. She was still not certain of him. She was not ready to forgive him. She had said so plainly, and meant it plainly. But she was letting him be useful. She was telling him how to be useful. That was trust of a kind. Provisional, careful, but real. He got up. He took his hat from the hook by the door. I'll go this morning, he said. William? He turned. She was looking at him with an expression he had not seen in a very long time. Not the nothing she had given him at the harbor house. Not the careful wariness of the weeks since, but something older than that. Something from the beginning of them, when she had walked into his father's failing company as a 22-year-old bride, and looked at the ledgers and said, without flinching, these numbers are wrong, and here is how to fix them. Thank you, she said, for talking to Birch. It's your project, he said. It's ours, she said. He stood very still in the doorway. She had said ours. Not yours, not mine. Ours. He held that word the way you hold something that might be fragile. Carefully, without squeezing. I'll be back by noon, he said. He left. The meeting with Birch went better than he expected. Amos Birch was a weathered, direct man in his late 60s who had made his money in timber and spent the last 20 years acquiring land, the way other men acquired opinions steadily without rush, with complete confidence in his own judgment. He received William in his back office with the slightly skeptical hospitality of someone who has been approached before by people who wanted something. Carter, he said, heard you were involved in the harbor project. My wife is the principal, William said. I'm supporting where I can. Birch raised an eyebrow. Something shifted in his assessment. Your wife, he said. Elizabeth Carter. Yes. I spoke with her in September, Birch said. Smart woman. She knew more about the southern parcel's title access than I did, and I've owned it for 11 years. That sounds like her, William said. Birch leaned back. She offered me a fair price in September. I told her I'd think about it. He paused. I heard about your daughter, born last month. September 12th, William said. Anna. Birch's expression did something quiet. My wife passed in the spring, he said. 41 years. William went still. I'm sorry. The parcel on the southern end, Birch said, the one your wife wants. My wife's family owned it originally. That's why I've been slow. He looked at William directly. It's not about price. William understood. He held the silence for a moment, not filling it, not rushing toward the transaction. What would help you decide? He said carefully. A guarantee, Birch said, that whatever gets built there, the name stays on one of the berths. Birch Wharf, something that doesn't get erased when the next generation decides they want something new. William nodded slowly. I'll need to speak with my wife and with Sterling. But I don't see why that couldn't be arranged formally in the contract. Then we have something to talk about, Birch said. He poured 2 glasses of something that was not tea and did not need to be. William came home at noon with Birch's provisional agreement and the knowledge that the second phase's primary land obstacle had just solved itself, not through leverage, not through price, but through listening. Through asking what a man actually needed and taking the answer seriously. Elizabeth was in the sitting room when he came in nursing Anna with the easy efficiency of a woman who had stopped treating natural things as if they required an apology. She looked up. Birch, he said. He'll sell. He wants a berth named after his wife's family. Formal guarantee in the contract. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. That's what he wanted, she said. I could feel it in September, but I didn't know how to ask without it seeming... He needed a man to ask, William said. It cost him something to say it, but it was true, and they both knew it was true. That's not fair, but it's how it is in 1817, and I'm glad I could be useful. She looked at him. Anna made a small sound. Elizabeth shifted her automatically. Birch Wharf, she said. His wife's maiden name, William said. Birch wants her remembered. Something moved through Elizabeth's face. That's actually right, she said quietly. A woman who isn't here to see what her family built getting her name on something that will last. She paused. I like that. He sat down. They were quiet together for a moment. Then Elizabeth said, We need to talk about the announcement dinner. Whenever you're ready. I'm thinking the second week of November, she said. It gives us time to get the Birch contract finalized and gives Sterling time to confirm his political guests. She shifted Anna again. I want it to be significant. Not a party. A statement. I'll handle whatever you need, he said. I know you will, she said. And the way she said it, not with surprise, not with the careful qualification she had been applying to everything for weeks, but plainly, as a simple statement of current fact, told him that something had quietly moved in the space between them. Not all the way, not forgiving, not repaired, but moved. He would take it. He would take every inch she was willing to give, and he would not ask for more than she was ready to offer, because he had spent 4 years demanding her attention without earning it, and he was done with that version of himself. He was done with the man who sat at table 7 with another woman while his wife built empires in the evenings. He was becoming someone different, slowly, badly. With the lurching, imperfect, genuine effort of a man who has understood too late, almost too late, but not quite exactly what he had been given and exactly what he had nearly thrown away. Anna yawned. It was objectively the smallest sound in the room. William Carter looked at his daughter and his wife in the afternoon light of their sitting room and felt the full, terrifying, clarifying weight of how close he had come to never having this moment. He held on to that. He intended to keep holding on to it. For a very long time. The announcement dinner was set for the second Friday of November. Elizabeth planned it the way she planned everything methodically without waste, with a precision that left no room for the kind of social theater that Boston's merchant class usually required. No excessive flowers, no hired musicians playing in corners, no seating arrangement designed to flatter egos in descending order of importance. Just good food, honest conversation, and a table large enough to hold the people who had made the harbor project real. Sterling confirmed 14 guests. William added 3 from the Carter Maritime side. Elizabeth's solicitor made 15. She made the seating chart herself at the kitchen table with Anna asleep in the cradle beside her, and William sitting across with the household accounts. They worked in companionable silence for an hour before she said without looking up, I'm putting you next to Parrish. All right. He respects you, she said. He told Hendricks after the Somerset dinner that Carter Maritime's involvement was the reason he felt confident committing to the second phase. She paused. I thought you should know that. He looked at her. You didn't have to tell me that. I know, she said. I told you because it's true, and because... She stopped, set down her pen, looked at him with the directness she had always had, the directness he had spent years not giving proper attention. Because we are building something together now, and people who build things together tell each other the true things. The word together sat in the room between them. He held it carefully. Yes, he said. They do. She picked up her pen again. They went back to work. Chapter 2 days before the dinner, a letter arrived. William saw it on the hallway table when he came in from the office, Hartford postmarked, the solicitor's seal addressed to Elizabeth. He left it there and went to find her. She was in the nursery with Anna doing the particular thing she did in the late afternoon, where she held the baby up to the window light and talked to her in a quiet conversational way, as if Anna were following along with the financial details of coastal lease agreements, which, given who her mother was, seemed not entirely out of the question. Letter from Hartford, he said from the doorway. Your solicitor. Elizabeth handed him the baby, with the smooth efficiency of someone who has run out of spare hands, went downstairs, read the letter standing in the hallway, and came back up. He was still holding Anna, who had grabbed his finger with the single-minded intensity she brought to everything, and was examining it with great seriousness. The trust restructure is complete, Elizabeth said. Final filing was approved last week. He looked up. The independent holding, she said. It's separate now. Legally mine, not subject to marital asset claims. She was watching him carefully. I started the process 8 months ago. I should have told you it was ongoing. He understood what she was telling him. 8 months ago, when she had found Caroline's ribbon and said nothing and started planning. She had also started quietly, legally protecting herself, making sure that whatever happened, she would not be left with nothing. He looked down at Anna, who had moved from his finger to his coat button, and was now treating it with equal seriousness. That was the right thing to do, he said. Elizabeth blinked. You're not... You were alone, and you didn't know what was going to happen, he said. You protected yourself and your child. That was exactly right. He met her gaze. I'm glad you did it. She stood very still in the hallway. I expected you to be upset, she said. I know you did, he said. I would have been 4 months ago. I would have made it about my pride. He looked back at Anna. But I'm not that man anymore, or I'm trying not to be. He paused. The trust stays separate. It's yours. Whatever happens between us, that doesn't change. Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment. Then she crossed the hallway and took Anna from him, not quickly, not pulling away, just taking her daughter back with the natural ease of a mother, and she said very quietly, against the top of Anna's head, I don't know yet, William, where we are going. I need you to understand that I still don't know. I understand, he said, but I am... She stopped, started again. I am less certain that I can't find a way forward than I was 3 months ago. That's the most honest thing I can give you right now. It was not a declaration. It was not a promise. It was a woman who had been carefully tending a single ember in a cold room, saying it hasn't gone out yet. He took it for exactly what it was. That's enough, he said. That's more than enough. The night of the dinner came cold and clear, the way November nights in Boston come, with a kind of clean, honest chill that strips away everything unnecessary and leaves only what is real. The guests arrived by 7. Sterling came early, as he always did, and stood with Elizabeth in the main room, reviewing a final point about the second phase timeline, while William managed the door with Thomas at his elbow, because Thomas had turned up uninvited, on the grounds that someone needed to make sure the shipping side of the table didn't embarrass itself, and William had decided this was probably correct. Parrish arrived with Hendricks. 3 of the Providence investors came together. The harbor commissioner, whose wife had cornered Elizabeth at the Somerset dinner and subsequently become one of the project's most vocal civic supporters, arrived with a city alderman in tow, which had not been on the guest list, but which Sterling absorbed without blinking. By 7:30, the room was full. William watched Elizabeth move through it. She had worn the blue again, a different shade than the harbor house. Deeper, richer, the blue of late evening rather than morning, and she wore it with the same deliberate calm she brought to everything. She was not performing. She was not working the room in the way that some people work rooms, with the anxious energy of someone who needs to be received well. She was simply present, speaking to each person with full attention, asking questions that told people she had done her homework on them. listening to the answers with the focus of someone who intends to remember. William watched Parrish's face when Elizabeth corrected a figure he cited gently accurately, without making him feel small, and then watched Parrish's expression shift from mild surprise to something that looked very much like respect. He watched the alderman who had arrived skeptical about the project and sat down next to Elizabeth at dinner, and by the time the second course was cleared, was asking her when the second phase would begin. He watched Sterling watch all of this with the quiet satisfaction of a man who recognized early what everyone else was now discovering. William sat at his end of the table next to Parrish and conducted his own conversations and did the work he was there to do. The Carter Maritime side, the fleet routes, the tonnage agreements that made the harbor expansion financially complete, rather than just architecturally impressive. And he did it well, because he was genuinely good at it, and he had stopped needing to be the most important person in the room to feel comfortable. Halfway through the main course, Parrish leaned over and said quietly, "Your wife is the most prepared person I have met in 20 years of business dinners, and I have had dinner with the governor." "I know," William said. "Did you always know?" William picked up his wine glass, set it back down. "No," he said honestly. "I didn't. I'm learning." Parrish looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded the slow, considered nod of a man who has made and lost and remade his own share of important things. "Better late than not," he said. "That's what I'm counting on," William said. After dinner, Sterling asked to say a few words. He was not a man who gave speeches in the theatrical sense. He stood at the head of the table with the same unhurried authority he brought to everything, and said plainly, this project had started with a proposal from Elizabeth Carter, had been developed over 2 years through her persistence and intelligence, and would transform the Massachusetts coastline for a generation. He said it the way you state a fact without flourish, without excessive praise, simply because it was true, and true things deserve to be said in full rooms. Elizabeth sat very still while he said it. William watched her face. She did not look triumphant. She did not look relieved. She looked like someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just been permitted finally to set it down, not because someone took it from her, but because the world had finally acknowledged what she was carrying. When Sterling finished, the room applauded, and then because the moment required it, people turned to Elizabeth. She stood. "The harbor expansion works," she said, "because it connects things that already existed, the land, the fleet, the capital, the labor. None of it was new. It just needed someone to see how it fit together." She paused. "I'm grateful to Jonathan Sterling for listening when I brought him that vision. And I'm grateful to the people at this table who trusted it enough to invest in it." Another pause, deliberate, brief. "And I am grateful to my husband whose fleet makes this possible, and who has in recent months shown me what a genuine partnership looks like." The room was quiet for a moment. William did not look away from her. She looked back at him, and for the first time since the harbor house, for the first time in longer than that, her eyes were fully open. No careful nothing, no protected distance. Just her, looking at him across the table in their home, with the clear and complicated honesty of a woman who has not forgotten anything, but has chosen in this moment to look forward anyway. Sterling raised his glass. Everyone followed. William raised his. The guests left by 10. Thomas was the last to go, helping the final coats into the hallway with the cheerful efficiency of a man who has had too much wine and is enjoying himself enormously. He shook William's hand at the door with more force than strictly necessary, and said very quietly, "She's remarkable, Carter. You always knew that. You just forgot for a while." "I know," William said. "Don't forget again." "I won't." Thomas left. William closed the door. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a room full of people fuller than the usual quiet warmer, still holding the shape of voices. Elizabeth was in the dining room gathering the last of the papers from the table. Mrs. Hooper had taken Anna up an hour ago. The fire in the sitting room was burning low. He went in. She was stacking the harbor survey documents with the automatic tidiness of someone who has learned that papers left out become lost papers. She didn't look up when he came in, but she was aware of him. He could tell by the slight change in how she was holding herself. "It went well," he said. It went very well, she agreed. The alderman wants to discuss the second phase with the city planning committee, he said. Parrish told me on his way out. I heard. She straightened the stack. Sterling said the same thing. He thinks we can have a formal city endorsement before spring. Silence settled. Not uncomfortable, just present. William moved to the other side of the table and began collecting the stray glasses that had migrated from the main table. He carried them toward the kitchen. You didn't have to say what you said, Elizabeth said behind him. He stopped, turned. She was still at the table, but she had stopped tidying. She was looking at him with the particular look of a woman deciding how much of the true thing to say. At dinner, she said, when you spoke to Parrish about me, Thomas told me what you said. He had told Thomas. He had not told him it was a secret, but he had not told him to repeat it either. I meant it, William said simply. I know you meant it, she said. That's what I'm... She pressed her lips together for a moment. 4 months ago, I didn't think you were capable of meaning it. I thought whatever change you were attempting was temporary, fear-based. The kind of change that lasts until the fear passes and then quietly reverts. I know that's what you thought, he said. I'm not sure that's what I think anymore, she said. He stood very still. What changed? He said. Not pressing, just asking. She was quiet for a moment. Birch, she said. The way you came home that morning. You didn't come home wanting credit for what you'd done. You came home and you told me what Birch needed and why, and you let me decide what to do with it. She paused. And then the trust. When I told you about the Hartford filing, and you... She stopped. I was prepared for a week of difficult conversations about what it meant that I had done it, and you told me I had done the right thing. You had, he said. I know I had, she said. But you told me so. He crossed the room. He stopped 3 feet away from her, not reaching, not presuming, just close. Elizabeth, he said, I have to ask you something, and I need you to know that whatever you answer, I will accept it. I'm not asking to pressure you. I'm asking because I need to know where I'm standing. She held his gaze. Are we... He stopped, found the right words. Is there a way forward for us, not what we were? I don't want what we were, but something new. Something that's actually what it should have been from the beginning. She looked at him for a long moment. Her answer when it came was not the sweeping declaration of a woman who had decided everything was forgiven and the story was resolved. It was something more real than that, something harder and more valuable. I think so, she said. I'm not ready to say I'm certain, but I think so. She held his gaze steadily. There are things I haven't finished being angry about, and I need you to understand that the anger doesn't mean I'm not also... She searched for the word. Moving toward something. Both things are true at once. I understand, he said. And I need it to be slow, she said. I need to trust it before I can't just decide to trust it. I have to watch it happen over time. I know, he said. I'm not going anywhere. William? I mean it, he said. I am not going anywhere. You take whatever time you need. I'll be here. She looked at him. Something shifted in her face, final and quiet, like the last piece of a long calculation coming clear. She reached out and straightened the lapel of his coat. A small gesture. A touch. The kind of casual intimacy that belongs to people who have been through things together and come out the other side changed, but present. She stepped back. Go check on Anna, she said. She'll be up for a feeding soon. He went. He stood in the nursery doorway and looked at his daughter sleeping. Anna Carter was 10 weeks old and had already in 10 weeks reorganized his understanding of what mattered and what didn't in ways he was still discovering. She had the determined jaw Elizabeth had predicted. She had his dark hair, which Elizabeth said was unfair, and which Mrs. Hooper said meant she'd be a beauty. She slept with her hands in fists, as if she were ready for whatever came next, and intended to meet it squarely. He was going to do better by her. He already knew that with the clarity of a thing that doesn't require deciding. He was going to be present and paying attention and treating her the way he should have been treating her mother from the beginning, as if what she thought and felt and built mattered as much as anything else in the room. He was going to teach her without meaning to what it looked like when a man actually showed up. He heard Elizabeth's footsteps on the stairs. She came and stood beside him in the nursery doorway, shoulder to shoulder looking at Anna. They stood there together. "She's going to need a bigger room," Elizabeth said. "By spring." "I'll have it sorted before winter," he said. "Thomas said the Providence investors are talking about a third phase," she said. "New Harbor, further north." "Sterling mentioned it to me last week," William said. "I told him I'd need to speak with you before I said anything about the fleet routes." She turned to look at him. He looked back. "That's the right answer," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm getting better at the right answers." She turned back to Anna. "Not perfect," she said, "but better." "Better is what I've got," he said. "I'll take it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So will I." The harbor opened in April of 1818 on a Thursday with the particular matter-of-fact efficiency of a thing that has been built carefully over time and is therefore ready when it needs to be. Elizabeth stood on the new pier with Anna on her hip, 8 months old, now sturdy and opinionated, attempting to grab everything within reach, and she watched the first Carter maritime vessel navigate the northern berth with the calm attention of a woman watching her own work become real. Sterling was there, Thomas was there, Parrish and Hendricks were there, the harbor commissioner was there, half of Boston's merchant community was there. William was standing beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. He had one hand at the small of her back, not managing her, not directing her, just present in the quiet way of a man who has finally learned the difference between possessing something and protecting it. She leaned into it. Slightly. Barely perceptibly, but she leaned. Sterling came to stand with them as the vessel made its final approach. He looked at the berth at the pier, at the work that had taken 2 years, and one woman's absolute refusal to accept that her vision wasn't worth pursuing. "Birch Wharf," he said, reading the nameplate on the southern berth. She would have liked this. Most of the best things, Elizabeth said, were built by women who didn't get to see them finished. Sterling was quiet for a moment. Then, this one did. Elizabeth looked at the water, at the ship, at the name on the berth and the structure of the thing she had imagined 4 years ago in 12 pages that someone had put in a drawer. She had not needed to be saved. She had not needed to be chosen. She had needed, and this was the only thing she had ever truly needed, to be seen, clearly, honestly, for exactly what she was. And she had gotten there the only way it was ever possible to get there. By becoming too visible to ignore. By building something so undeniably real that the world had no choice but to look at it and acknowledge in the clear light of an April morning in Boston Harbor that Elizabeth Carter had been right. She had been right about the shipping lanes. She had been right about the timing. She had been right about the land and the labor and the title windows and the return on investment and every figure in every column of every page she had put on her husband's desk 3 years ago. She had been right about herself. And William Carter, standing beside her on the pier, he would never have built without her, with his hand at her back and his name on her project and his daughter on her hip, knew it. He had known it for months now. He had been spending those months proving one day at a time that knowing it was not enough. That the real work, the work of a marriage, the work of becoming the person someone deserves, requires more than understanding. It requires showing up every single day with your full attention and your honest effort, and the willingness to keep going even when it's slow and hard, and the forgiveness you need isn't yet fully given. He was still doing that work. He would be doing it for years. And Elizabeth Carter, standing on the pier she had built, watching her vision become real with the man she had not yet finished forgiving. Standing steady at her side, she was doing it too. Not because she had forgotten, not because the past had been erased, but because some things, when they are built carefully enough and tended honestly enough and given enough time and truth, and the rare difficult courage of two people deciding to keep going, some things survive. And sometimes in surviving, they become better than they were before. Stronger, clearer, more honest, more real. The ship found its berth. The harbor opened. Elizabeth did not look back.